today we're going to focus on our Epic Mesh product. As Gary mentioned, it's newer in the marketplace, been on distribution shelves for, maybe 3-4-ish weeks or so, maybe a little longer. And we're excited about, excuse me, being able to offer this product to you guys specifically, because really that was bottom line here. That is one of the goals that we had, was to make a mesh product that was specifically designed for the custom integrator, not necessarily the mass market crowd that also sells to custom integrators. So we're going to go through a couple of things here as far as our agenda goes. We're going to talk about what a mesh network is, how it's different from regular APs. Then that transitions into when should you use mesh versus APs. And then we'll talk about the hardware and the software that goes along with the new product. In case you haven't gone through it, you can see how easy it is to set up and what some setup tips and tricks are. And then we'll go through some of the installation features and things that are unique to us and that are specifically designed, like I said, for you guys in the marketplace as custom installers. So I have availability down there. Get rid of that. It's already available, so that's irrelevant. But that's kind of our basic agenda. Doesn't seem like much, but I want to go through a number of things here. So let's jump right in and start off with, what is a mesh network? Well, as you all know, there has been an enormous amount of advertising about mesh over the last couple of years, to the point really where it's actually somewhat kind of become a ubiquitous term, where people, just consumers, ask for, well, is this a mesh network? And they don't even really know what that means. But they've heard the term, and so they think that they want it. And so let's talk about what mesh is and what mesh isn't. First of all, is mesh new? And the answer to that is no, actually it isn't. Mesh is not a new technology, contrary to what the marketing would have you say, that it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to Wi-Fi since sliced bread. It's actually about 20 plus years old. It's not new. There's been a few things that have been updated to make it more modern, and we'll talk about those. But the technology itself has actually been around for a long, long time. Interestingly, the companies that have been doing it for a long time also offer a hardwired product. And if you call them up and say, hey, I'd like to do your mesh product, they will actually tell you to pump the brakes a little bit and say, you know what, whoa, hold on. Why don't you use our hardwired product instead, because it performs much, much better. And that is still true. Mesh is a solution. It is not the solution every single time, as we'll talk about. So just so that we put that out there, mesh is actually not this new thing. Now, there are a couple of things that have happened with mesh that have kind of brought it into the forefront. One is a dedicated radio for the nodes to connect to themselves. And as you'll hear when we talk about APs, in the mesh world, they call them nodes. And the other is that there's an algorithm that's been created to try and kind of self-heal and self-propagate. So we'll talk about all those here in just a moment. Like I mentioned, mesh companies have done a great job with marketing, and really what they try to connotate is that you just put it in, you never have to worry about it, everything just works, and there's a lot of that is actually accurate. It works fairly well in most applications. But really what mesh is all about is coverage. If you think about what they're trying to sell against, is you're replacing the one single service provider provided modem router combo or whatever the case is with 2 or 3 different nodes. So yeah, I would hope that your system performs better because you've tripled your coverage areas or the amount of points of coverage or points of access. So yeah, hopefully it would certainly perform better in that regard. Okay, so that's really what they're going for, and really what they're trying to say is that we're going to increase the coverage area around the home or business or whatever the case is that you're looking at putting it into. So what is a mesh network? Well, it really is defined by this simple sentence. It's a system of APs, and again, in the mesh world, they call them nodes, that automatically creates a self-organizing and self-healing network, kind of like a spider web. So what does that mean? Well, let's take this example on this graphic here, and let's say that right over here on the far right side, I've got the one node that is connected via Ethernet to my modem router combo, whatever the case happens to be. And then the others are spread across the home in different locations that are just plugged into the power. And they're all connected wireless. And sometimes they'll connect to another node. Sometimes they'll connect back to the remote node. It just kind of depends on what they decide to do. Where the self-organizing and self-healing comes in is this is that algorithm that I spoke about, where if let's say that you're over in this very far left corner of the house here, and the pathway that the mesh system has determined is that my best path is to jump to this one, then to the one up top, then to the one over here, and then back to the one that's connected to the network. And if that's what's determined, then that's fine. Let's say that something happens and maybe this one up top here gets unplugged from power. What the mesh system has the ability to do is reorganize itself. And so they've come up with this term called self-healing, which basically says, okay, well, this one's gone. So now I'm going to rearrange my pathway and I'm going to go from here straight to this one and then over to this one. And it does that automatically in the background. There's no intervention whatsoever for you to have to worry about all of this. It just kind of takes care of itself and kind of organizes itself in whatever it thinks is the best pathway possible. So that's really what mesh is doing and why it's different from APs. APs, of course, in traditional sense, you put a couple of APs in, they're hardwired back, which of course hardwired we all know is always going to be a better connection than wireless is. And so there's some pros and some cons, and we'll go through that. The pro, of course, with APs is that there's only one hop, and that one hop is from device to access point, and then everything else is on Ethernet from that point backward. Well, with mesh, that's not always the case. You're now going wireless to wireless to wireless, and sometimes there are multiple hops depending upon the layout. And of course, now you're subject to all of the unpredictable things that come along with wireless transmission. So, pros and cons. That doesn't mean that mesh is bad by any means. If it was, we wouldn't have a product. But it just means that there's a few things to consider. So what are some of those things to consider whether you should use APs or whether you should use mesh? Well, before I say this, I want to make it clear these are general guidelines. These are not hard and fast rules. Obviously, you as the dealer and the integrator have the ability and should have the ability to determine what's going to be best for your client in that particular situation. But there are some guidelines that we throw out there to try and say, hey, look, maybe this is something you should consider. So, first off, I want to make clear that mesh is not a replacement for any of the access points in our lineup. If you are going to be doing a larger system, which we'll talk about in a moment, where you would normally use access points, we still recommend that you use access points. You're going to get a better result for your end customer. So it's not a replacement, it's just an addition to the line. So now that in those situations where mesh is appropriate, you don't have to go somewhere else to another product just to accomplish that situation. So when are some times when mesh is appropriate? Well, certainly the big one is when you cannot get an Ethernet wire to the location of where you need to put something. And this, of course, is multiple applications. Maybe it's a completely finished home and you can't fish through the walls. Maybe it's a lath and plaster wall. Maybe it's, a couple of different floors away. Who knows? But for whatever reason, you cannot retrofit a wire there, and that's perfectly acceptable. Mesh may be a great solution for that. Certainly, it's a great solution when a simple network is needed. Well, how do we define simple network? Well, simple network in this case is defined as it's a smaller network. You're going to have maybe 30 or so devices, wireless devices on the network, and maybe it's a scenario where it's mom and dad at home, they're empty nesters. There's not going to be a whole lot of automation or anything going on. They're basically going to be doing basic surfing, web browsing, maybe some streaming of some streaming services, Netflix, that type of thing. And it's just going to be, they just need some more coverage. That's a great scenario for mesh. And certainly, of course, retrofit applications, again, kind of going in line with that. When you can't get a wire somewhere, mesh does become a very viable solution in those cases. On the flip side, when should we use APs? Well, of course, as you would imagine, like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be your larger homes, larger networks, larger systems in general, where you're going to have a whole lot of devices that need constant connectivity and really reliable connectivity on the network. Certainly, if active roaming is something that would be beneficial to the client, if it's a larger home, you've got multiple APs in there, they want to be able to roam from AP to AP to AP on an active basis instead of just a fast roaming basis, then certainly that could be a benefit as well. Again, not hard and fast rules, but just general guidelines. Our thought is if you're going to be doing an automation system or a IP camera system or video over IP or something that requires robust networking in order to function reliably and well, then you're probably going to want to look at and very strongly consider access points instead of mesh. Please don't misunderstand. That doesn't mean that mesh doesn't work with an automation system. It does. But the automation system, of course, usually has an app that goes along with it that is required to run it if they don't have handheld remotes. And so they want constant connectivity for that no matter where they happen to be in their home. And so APs, certainly with active roaming, can provide that on a higher level and a more reliable level than what sometimes wireless to wireless to wireless mesh can. And certainly with new construction, if you're pre-wiring and you have the ability to run wires everywhere, the general networking rule of principle still applies. Hardwired is always better than wireless in every situation. So if you can pull wire everywhere, do it. Still do it. Don't just rely upon wireless all the time. The end result and experience, like I said, to your end customer will be a higher level experience than if you're just doing everything wirelessly. So those are some general guidelines. Hope that kind of helps maybe answer some questions or clear things up as to when each system is appropriate to use. Okay. Any questions so far, Gary, that we want to touch on before I jump into this?
Not that need to be answered right now.
Okay.
If there's questions, the guys are right with you, I can tell. So let's move forward.
Cool. So let's go into the product itself. And if something comes up, we'll tackle it at that point. So the product is actually physically very simple. It's got an LED indicator on the front, and there's a couple of things that you want to watch out for and notice as to, obviously this indicates what the node is doing. And the first one is that, obviously if it's flashing green, that means it's booting up. If it's solid blue, that indicates two things. Number one, that it's factory defaulted and ready to be set up. And the reason we chose blue is because actually the communication between the app and the device to begin with takes place over Bluetooth, not over Wi-Fi. Doesn't switch to Wi-Fi until after the unit is set up. So blue is an indicator that I'm ready to be set up using the Easy Setup app, and I'm factory defaulted, which also is a requirement. If it's solid white, then of course that means it's operating normally, it's just fine. And then of course flashing red does mean that there's something wrong. And we've seen really two scenarios with this. If it's a router node, the flashing red generally indicates that it's lost its connection to the internet, whether that's to the modem, to the ISP, whatever the case is. That's generally what it means. If it's a remote node, it generally means that it's lost its wireless communication back to another node in the system somewhere. And typically speaking, in both cases, what we've found by the majority of the time is that a simple power cycle takes care of both of those. Now, again, don't misunderstand me. It's not like this happens often. It doesn't. We've actually had very good success with the product so far. But just so that you know, if you come across those scenarios, generally a simple power cycle takes care of it. It reconnects back up and everything works just fine afterwards. Yes, you can turn the LED off if you want to. You can do that in the UI, and we'll talk about the UI here in a little bit. That's really about it on the front or the top of the unit. The back side of the unit is also very simple. It's got two Ethernet ports, a power port, and then a reset button. And so let's go through this here just a little bit. One thing to point out is, unlike some of the other products, mesh products that are out there, they don't care which port your Ethernet goes into from the internet connection. So I'm talking now only about the router node, which is the first one that will be set up, which is directly connected to your modem or modem router combo. That one does need to go into the port labeled internet. And that's really about the only one that you have to worry about, is on that first node to make sure it goes into that particular port. If you're talking about a remote node, which we'll talk about in just a moment more, but you can kind of think of that more of like a two-port switch. Doesn't really matter which one is used. You can see they're also marked LAN 1 and LAN 2, so it doesn't matter which one you connect to. They're both active. Then, of course, you have the power connector and then a reset button, which is a very standard reset button, just like on all the other Luxul wireless products. If you tap it real quickly, it will do a reboot. If you press and hold for 15 seconds, it will factory default the unit. And the indicator, the LED indicator, does show that, of course. It then flashes green for a second while it boots back up and redoes itself. And then it'll show up with a blue LED indicating, yes, I'm factory defaulted and ready to be set up. And that, from a physical standpoint of the product, is pretty much it. There's some rubber feet on the bottom. That's about it. That's really all the product is. Okay. Now the fun stuff is, how do you connect remote nodes? And this you have two options for. The first one is you can connect them wired. So again, going back to that same general networking principle, if you have an Ethernet cable close to where you're going to plug a node in, by all means plug it in, and then the node will use the Ethernet as its connection back to the network rather than the wireless radios. And it's a much better experience. It just works, in a much nicer fashion. Okay. In this case, if you do that, it does not matter which port you use. You can mix and match wired and wireless in the same system. So you can have one node that's wired and another node that's wireless. That's perfectly fine. And you can also use the other port on each node to connect out to another device or to a small switch with a couple of devices on it. However you want to do it is perfectly acceptable. You've got a lot of different flexibility with those two ports. If you're going to connect it via wireless, it does have, of course, a dedicated 5 gigahertz backhaul radio in it. So yes, it is tri-band, to borrow that phrase from another company that's actually made that famous. All tri-band means it's actually 2 5 gig bands, but there's 3 radios. And so, yes, it does have that. Ours has a few things that are kind of cool, a little bit different. It is 5 gigahertz. It does have beamforming. It is multi-user MIMO. It is Wave 2. It also is a 4x4 antenna array, not a 2x2. So basically what that means is the pipe that you have between the nodes is bigger than it's going to be on competitors' products. So you have a much bigger pipe for a lot more bandwidth between all of the nodes on the wireless side. There is something to note about the backhaul antenna. As you know, as most of you probably know, most of the dispersion patterns of our access points are a big 360-degree circle. They're a big bubble. And that is still the case with the broadcast of the 2.4 and 5 gig antennas that devices will connect to. There is a difference in the antenna array for the wireless backhaul. In other words, the dedicated radio that only nodes can connect to. And so because of that, and I'll explain that here in just a moment, but because of that, you do not want to have some of your nodes horizontal and some of them vertical. You do want to more appropriately have them all in the same orientation. So you want to use the little rubber feet on the bottom. I bring this up, and please don't get me wrong, it's not like if you have one horizontal and one vertical, they won't connect at all. That's not the case. But it won't be as strong of a signal potentially as what it could be if they were all in the same orientation. Well, why is that? Well, certainly we know that most mesh products are placed on something, shelf, counter, armoire, or the top of a cabinet where it's hidden, something like that. I know a lot of them get mounted on the ceiling with a separate accessory kit, which we are looking at coming up with as well. But by and large, they're kind of placed on something, and so you do want to use those and make sure that they're in the same orientation. Okay, the reason for that is because engineering came up with a different antenna design or dispersion pattern from the antennas on the dedicated backhaul radio. And it is kind of like I guess you could call it kind of like a flying saucer. I realize this is a very rudimentary picture, but it kind of illustrates the point in that, it is kind of wide and then tall. And the idea here is that it gives more power out to the sides, from the side of each direction of the unit so that it can connect to other nodes that are on the same level in a more effective manner. It also then has a bump in the middle so that it can go up and down so that you can connect to nodes that are on different floors more effectively and with greater signal strength between the nodes than if you just had one big bubble there. So looks like we got a couple of questions coming in. Gary, anything we need to stop for at this point? I don't see him
Well, I
yet.
started off with Michael, and he was, coming into this saying, hey, I really want Jared to speak to the competing products, because, they have their struggles out there, which I think you've been alluding to during this presentation, which I appreciate. You're pointing out, in the antenna scenario, yours is 4x4, there's 2x2 out there. Let's continue that discussion. I think it really does help these guys be focused on exactly what they're up against out there,
Yeah,
and your feature sets that you're doing. So we'll continue that.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael. Kenneth, is it advantageous to elevate your nodes?
Not necessarily. I mean, as with most Wi-Fi products, you don't want to necessarily put them on the floor. If you can elevate them a little bit, on a table, shelf, counter, something, certainly you're able to hide them still. We can get very creative with placement so that they're not out in the open. They don't necessarily require that. But yeah, certainly, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're high in the room, but if you're not on the floor, that's going to help any Wi-Fi device.
John was curious why you guys didn't do Wi-Fi 6 into this new product line.
Yeah,
there?
we do get this question fairly frequently. We actually are looking at doing Wi-Fi 6. We have a number of Wi-Fi 6 products on the roadmap that will be coming. We're looking at incorporating it into a mesh as well. The bottom line, the main reason is that this product has actually been in development for over a year, and Wi-Fi 6 wasn't really even the discussion point that it is now a year ago. And then with manufacturing delays, like I mentioned, with COVID and all that stuff, it just didn't get incorporated now, but it is being looked at. So it's not off the table by any means. There is a very long Wi-Fi 6 discussion. The short of it is it has a ton of marketing hype behind it. Not a whole lot of practical application yet until the majority of the devices that are on the network are Wi-Fi 6 capable. What they don't tell you in the marketing is that unless the majority of devices on the network are Wi-Fi 6 capable, then the router or AP, whatever it is, actually reverts back to and goes to regular Wi-Fi 5 mode, which is regular AC. So lots of things going on with Wi-Fi 6. I don't have time to get into that discussion, but bottom line is it is on the table. It is something we're looking at. We do plan to have a couple of products coming up. Will there be a PoE adapter available? Yes, that is something that we are looking at. We originally intended to have a ceiling mount with a PoE option launch at the same time as this. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. So we're still looking into ways that we can accomplish that. So yes, that is definitely something we understand that has a large amount of request. Can you combine an AP and a mesh network together on the same network system? We'll get to that, but the quick answer is no, you can't. The mesh chips, and that's not a Luxul decision. That's because of the way the mesh chipset and the algorithm in that work. They are compatible only with other mesh devices. So unfortunately, at this point, the decision you really got to make up front is, am I going mesh or am I going traditional APs? You cannot have an AP system and then add a mesh node to it, unfortunately. Okay. Let's see here. I think that Wi-Fi 6 be a firmware update or replace product. Wi-Fi 6 does require a different chipset, so unfortunately, it is not capable of being a firmware update. Okay. Completely different chipset. Think of it this way. 6 is the same thing as when everybody was using only 2.4 because that's all that was available, and 5 gigahertz came out. You have to add a different radio, a different chipset, and your device has to be compatible with it as well. So it's not just some firmware code. It's a completely different hardware set, chipset, everything. Okay. Great questions so far.
Yeah, they're definitely engaged. Let's move forward. We'll take another break in about 15 minutes, perhaps. Thank you. And thank you for speaking to about R&D. I mean, we think of you as the president of the company, so you're going to get all the questions.
That's
Keep
fine.
going.
I'm used to that. Okay. So let's talk about the configuration here. This is where things get really fun because it is very, very simple. In the same regard as a lot of other mesh systems use an app to be set up, we do the same thing. It is our easy setup app that we've had for a couple of years that has been able to set up our wireless routers, but we've enhanced it quite a bit. It's a completely different app, actually, even though it has the same name. So what happens here is, and I will go through this, and it looks like there's maybe a decent amount of slides here or screens here, but in reality, this takes less than 2 minutes, and I am not exaggerating. I can set up a 3-node mesh system in about 5 to 6 minutes. It sometimes takes me longer to walk to the new node than it does for the app to set it up. So with that in mind, again, a couple things we have to be aware of in order for the app to properly recognize a node. It does have to be in a factory default state, so you want to look for that blue LED. It does need to be, the first one you're going to set up is going to be designated as the router node. And so it does need to be connected to the internet with that internet WAN connection. Okay. And then other nodes, of course, are all automatically going to be set up as remote nodes. And so let's go through this. The first 2 screens, of course, are just going to be the regular things that have always been there, which is essentially some instructions saying, hey, look, make sure you got power on, make sure you got all the cables connected properly, you've got internet all the way through, everything's working the way that it should, essentially. Okay. Then you can manually type in some information, but 99.9% of us are always just going to scan the code on the back. And in the case of mesh, it is a QR code. So as you scan the code on the back, literally this is what it looks like. I had to grab a real quick screenshot because as soon as that camera goes across it, it sees it and starts to connect. It detects the node, which essentially is establishing a connection between the device that you're using, whether it's a phone or a tablet, and the node itself. And then when it's detected, it asks you a question. Is this a new setup or an existing setup? Well, for this, we're going to do a new setup. So we hit next, it applies that changes, and then of course, the first thing it asks you is to change the admin password. Thanks to our lovely legislative friends in California and a couple of other states, we cannot leave it default as admin anymore. So it does ask you and prompt you to change the admin password right up front. Once you do that, it looks for an internet connection. And a couple of things are going to happen. On rare occasions, it will come up with this screen where it can't find it. But that's not the rule, that's the exception. If it comes up with this, you can hit try again because there's most likely one thing that's happening, especially if you're using a modem router combo. Most of the time, what's going to happen is it's going to say, hey, great, the device is online, I can see the internet, everything's good to go. If on those chances where you see this red oops screen and you click try again, it is possible that you will see this screen come up where in orange there, it will tell you that an IP address conflict was detected and I've moved the node to a different IP subnet to avoid that conflict. Here's where this becomes important and really kind of cool and easy for you from a setup standpoint. If you're using a modem router combo that is on a 192.168.0 subnet, that's the same subnet that all Luxul devices, including the mesh, are on by default. The app will detect that and automatically move your device or your mesh node off of that subnet and tell you what the new one is going to be, thereby avoiding and resolving the IP conflict and getting you out to the internet. Okay, so it's really kind of slick and easy. It works that way if you come in across that situation. Most of the time, it's just going to say the device is online. Then it asks you to name where the location of this particular node is, and you can certainly choose from one of the preset options there, or you can click on the bottom and create whatever room you want. Once you do that, it then goes to the part where you set up the Wi-Fi networks. And of course, you want to set up your primary SSID and your password. You can add guest networks. You can add more SSIDs, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. You set that up. We'll get to the separate SSIDs here in a second, but we do allow you to change them. You can, like I mentioned, you can set up a guest network if you want to. It is a secure guest network, so it is on a different subnet. It does create a different subnet for it. So it's not just a different SSID. It is a completely different built-in VLAN subnet. Then it applies the changes to you and asks if you want to add additional nodes. And if you do, you hit yes. If you don't, you hit no. It's pretty simple. If you would hit yes, then you walk to the next node, scan the code on the back of that one. It then establishes a relationship with that new node, and then asks if you're going to add this node wired or wireless. If you're going to add it wired, then it doesn't matter which Ethernet port you're plugged into. Of course, you just hit next. It grabs its IP address from there, and everything goes as it normally would. There's nothing else to it. If you select wireless, then the next thing it will do is check the signal strength between where this node is and any other and all nodes in the system. And it's going to come back with one or two results. One of them is going to be that signal strength is poor. The other is going to be that signal strength is good. If it comes back and says signal strength is poor, certainly that is an indication that you need to physically move the node because it's far enough away from anything else that it isn't able to obtain a really good signal between the other nodes in that environment. So you definitely want to move it in that case. But if it comes back and says it's good, which is most of the time, because you're probably not spreading these things out terribly far, then you're usually good to go. You name the location of where that particular node is. It applies the changes and then asks you again, says, yes, we've successfully added it. Do you want to add additional? If you want to add another one, you hit yes, go through the same process. If you're done at this point, then you hit no, and it'll tell you the system's been configured. Here's some information for you, and you're good to go. You're done. That is it. The system is now set up and running. The other thing that the app is used for is adding a node to a system that's already set up. So the scenario here would be I've got maybe 2 nodes in the system, and it's determined that I need to add a third one. So I run back to one of my Snap locals, grab a node, or maybe you've got one on the truck. Maybe it's been a month or two, and the customer's just saying, hey, look, I need a little more Wi-Fi in this particular area. You can certainly add a node to an existing system. You do not have to set up or factory default any of the nodes. You don't have to start from scratch or from ground zero. You just go in and add the node. So it's the same process as you could probably imagine. You bring up the app, you scan the barcode, it asks you if you're going to do a new or an existing setup. And in this case, of course, you do existing, which means I'm going to just add this node to a system that's already there. It will then detect that node and then ask you for the admin password. Now, this is the same. This is not the Wi-Fi password. This is the admin password that's used to get into the user interface, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will in just a moment. Okay, so this is the admin password. And the nice thing here is you'll notice that in orange, again, it tells you right here what Wi-Fi network your device is connected to. Certainly when you're adding a node, you want your device to be on the same Wi-Fi network that you're adding the node to. And for the most part, that'll be the case because you're there at the person's home or business, probably attached to the Wi-Fi to get it up and running. So you put in the admin password, it makes sure that that is the correct password, and then same process. Are you adding this node wired or wirelessly? And if you hit wireless, goes through the same thing, checks the signal strength, comes back and says the signal strength is good or poor. If it's good, then you hit next and it adds the changes. And at this point, it's grabbing all of the configuration options and information from the existing system. You name the location of where this node is going to be, and then it says, cool, you've successfully added it. Do you want to add another one? And if you do, then you hit yes. If you don't, you hit no. It adds the final changes and tells you success. Everything's been set up. You've added that node to the system. Okay, that literally is it from a setup or an adding a node standpoint. Okay, so I see a bunch of questions coming in here. Let me finish this one section and then we'll get to some of those questions. This is where our app stops. We don't use the app for everything else that the system will do. As a matter of fact, we've done this again on purpose to make it so that it's much more of a custom installer type product. And what that means is that every other and any other additional configuration after the initial config, is done in a regular web user interface that you would see with any regular Luxul router. This allows for a lot of configurability and customization rather than just having a few things in the app that you can do to customize a few things. This is a full user interface with full router functionality. So you can do anything you want. You can go in and add guest networks here. You can change the Wi-Fi password. You can change the SSIDs if you want. You can add SSIDs. All of these things we'll talk about here in just a moment. But you have full, capability of what you would normally expect with any regular router. Okay, so let me pull up some of the questions here and see what we've got so far. Can you broadcast 2.4 only SSIDs for those cheap devices that can get confused with combined systems? Yes, you can. We'll get to that here in just a minute. But yes, you absolutely can. That's one of the things that we've tried to do as a custom install feature. Let's see here. So one of the guys asks, been installing Eero Pro for a couple years. How's this better? Why should I switch? Well, again, this is made for you as a custom installer. There's a lot more customizable features, as you'll see here in just a moment. There's some margin built in that you don't have with the other, a lot more margin, I should say. And there's full support and a 4x4 backhaul radio. So you have quite a bit more, like I said, a much bigger pipe between all of the nodes when you use it wirelessly, connect them all wirelessly. So those are just a couple of things. Do you have to set up the router in bridge mode? Yes, you do. The first one is connected as a router node. However, because of the fact that it automatically detects if there's an IP conflict, you don't necessarily have to go put your modem into bridge mode as well. We have had some requests to be able to use it as just a access point. That may be coming in a future update, but as of right now, it is all set up. Another question that generally goes along with that, it looks like I see it here. Do you have to establish an account in order to perform the setup? No, you do not. Nothing that we do is held in the cloud. It's all locally stored. So if your system loses connection to the internet, if let's say your service provider has an outage or something, the local network, the Wi-Fi, the local LAN, all still works. So nothing is held in the cloud. There's no, anything like that. Okay. How many nodes can you have on a network? Technically, you can have up to 16, but I would never recommend that. 3, 4, 5 is about the max you want to do. You do more than that, and you should really start looking at APs instead. Okay. Can you hook up a 24-port wired switch? Absolutely. I've done that at my house for testing. I've got the modem going into the internet port and coming out of the other port into a 24-port switch, and it runs the wired network fantastically. Okay. So remote monitoring alerts. This is, we'll get into that in just a little bit. I'll talk about that in another. We'll also talk about pricing in a little bit. ProWatch is also coming up, so lots of things that we're doing here. Okay, so that's kind of the questions for the moment. All right, so let's get into some of the custom install features. I want to be cognizant of time here, and I'm not quite sure where we're looking. Oh, we got some time. We're good. Okay, so some of the differentiators, some of the things that make our product a little bit different here. Oh, excuse me. Oh. So going back to this question of, can we separate out 2, 4, and 5 SSIDs? Yes, you can. Most mesh products do not allow this. There's a reason for that. Again, this isn't necessarily a Luxul decision. The decision was ours to allow you to separate them out, but the mesh chipset itself actually doesn't like that very much. And the reason why is because if you do that, if you'll notice that if you change this SSID button to not being the same, this part right here in orange will show up that says, yes, you can do that, but be aware if you do, that will disable fast roaming and band steering. And that is the part of the chipset that is, they don't allow you to turn those two things on unless the SSIDs are named the same, which goes back to what I said a minute ago. That's a big reason why most other mesh systems don't allow you to separate them out. However, we understand that there are a number of situations where you have a device that's maybe 2.4 only that has a tough time connecting to a network that is 2, 4, and 5 shared SSID, or same SSID. And so with that, it makes it difficult for those devices to actually attach. Well, we want to make it so that that's easier. So if you need to separate out the SSIDs, you can certainly do that. Here's the other option. You can leave the primary SSID the same. So leave 2.4 and 5 the same so that you get the benefits of the fast roaming and the band steering. Now, to be clear, the fast roaming that is in the mesh system is not the same active roaming that's in our wireless controller. Two completely separate systems. Just wanted to mention that. But if you do want to take advantage of the fast roaming and the band steering, then you certainly can. And then you have the ability to add another 2.4 only SSID on top of that if you want to. Okay, so that is certainly an option there as a way to kind of get around it and kind of have the best of both worlds. Speaking of SSIDs, you can do 8 of them, 4 per band, and they don't have to be combined. You could, like I just mentioned a moment ago, you could make just a single 2.4 only SSID and have that broadcast and have your other devices that are 2.4 only connect to that if you need to. So lots of flexibility and customization there. Again, this is all done in that user interface, not in the app. You can set it up in the app in the initial setup, but you don't have to. You can come back and do it later in the regular UI. There is a full range of subnets, again, just like a regular router. So there is no preset list of 2 or 3 drop-down menu subnets that you can choose from. And if that doesn't work, then you're kind of out on a limb, and you have to call them to have them hard coded in. If you need to do 192.168.1 or 10.0.0.1, you can do that. It doesn't matter. We don't care. It's fully featured, full functionality. So you can make the subnet whatever you need or want it to be. Okay. Obviously, we do support static leases and port forwarding, so that if you have static leases that you need to have on the system, great, no problem. Same thing with port forwarding. If you need to port forward out for maybe a camera NVR app or something like that, then certainly that's no problem as well. So again, trying to make it much more like a full-featured router. Now, one of the other big things is the transmit power. As I'm sure most of you are well aware, one of the things that is unique about Luxul APs is that they broadcast at a very high transmission rate, which is why some of the bigger ones have a very large heat sink on the back of them. The mesh is in a similar fashion. You can see here what we're broadcasting at versus what some of our competitors broadcast at. And by the way, that competitor number is a peak number. Most of the time it's not that high. It usually is more along the 150 milliwatt mark and will peak up to 250 at certain times. Ours is high all the time. Yes, it does generate a little more heat dissipation, but or heat, which is why the vent is around the top of the unit there, but it works really, really well. And so the bottom line here is you should be able to get more coverage area with fewer nodes. I can tell you I've got about a 3,200 square foot house. It's a rambler, so a main level and a basement. And I had 3 nodes, and that works just fine. But I can actually get away with 2 nodes and cover the entire house and the majority of my 3rd-acre yard. Now, as that's not always the case, of course, certainly as we all know with wireless, the environment plays a huge factor into how far and how fast the signal will go. But just to kind of give you some idea that generally speaking, you're not going to have as many nodes as you would with a lower powered system. Okay, and that's the same for any AP, whether it's mesh or whether it's a standard AP. That's just kind of the way Wi-Fi works. Some other features, connected clients. I know some people like to tout big numbers. So, we'll do 128 connected clients at the same time. That is really kind of a bogus number because it really depends upon what the clients are doing at the time as to how many of them the unit will actually accept. And it certainly speaks to the processing capability inside the processor of the unit itself, of the node or AP itself. We are very comfortable saying this is going to be comparable to one of our 810s, maybe a little higher. It's got a very robust processor in it. It will, I can tell you, it's run my system for months and months. In fact, I'm broadcasting on it right now, and it has worked very, very well without a hitch. I have over 100 devices on my network, and it works just fine without a problem. Doesn't ever slow down. So for those of you asking about ProWatch and for a remote management solution, yes, ProWatch will be coming in a future firmware update. And this will be the full ProWatch Plus version. So it won't just be a cloud connected thing that gets you into just the mesh system. It will expand out and encompass every single device, regardless of brand, on the network. So we're looking very forward to that. Don't have a timetable as to when that is. I know that it is in beta right now, but so it's coming. It's being worked on. It actually is functioning in a couple of places. So it is on the way. So you will have a full-featured version of ProWatch inside the mesh unit. You also will have router limits that will be coming in a future firmware update. So your content, time control, all those types of things will also be available in the mesh system as well. So excited about those types of things. Here's just kind of a real quick comparison to some of the other products that are out there. Certainly, Eero and Google Home are probably the top two sellers that we compete with on a regular basis all the time as far as mesh goes. And you can kind of see here, there's a lot of green in our column that we're really excited about. So lots of things that we've kind of covered here. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but just to kind of give you an idea that we feel we're extremely competitive in the marketplace. As far as purchasing options go, you can buy it one of two ways. There is obviously a single node, which is called the MN10, can be used as a regular single router. We've actually seen some people use this as just the router, turn the Wi-Fi radios off, and then use a controller and AP setup as the Wi-Fi so that they can get the active roaming and the hardwire connected APs. This is a great router. It does do gigabit WAN to LAN, so no speed issues there. It works actually really, really well as a router. And then, of course, there's the kit, which is the MK10, which is 2 nodes in the box. So you can start with one of those and then add more, individual nodes if you need to, however you want to do it. It's completely, of course, flexible and customizable to whatever you need. Okay. So with that, let's jump back to some questions. Gary, where do we want to start?
Well, I was kind of erasing as we went, but going back just a little bit, you had some PoE questions and compatibility questions come up a few times. Maybe we could start there.
Yeah, so it does not natively have PoE built in. None of the mesh systems do. They generally require some sort of accessory kit that will convert from PoE. Again, we intended to originally have that out at the same time as launch. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way for a number of reasons, but we are still looking at having a PoE option available. That is extremely high on the list of priorities to make happen.
Speaking of lists, like Lou is asking, are there PoE switches available, or is there a list? He doesn't want to, do trial and error.
A list of PoE switches?
Correct.
If they're PoE, if so.
Before that, Lou was asking, PoEs that are compatible.
It'll probably be PoE plus, just like the rest of our APs are, would be my guess. I don't know that for sure. I'd have to verify that with engineering, but just as a guess, given the transmit power that we're broadcasting with, I would imagine it's going to require PoE plus, not just standard PoE, which is what all of our APs do. So,
all right, let's continue with the lightning round. Anonymous attendee, can you broadcast 2.4 only SSID for those cheap devices that get confused with combined systems?
Yep, we talked about that, and yes, you certainly can.
Can you please give pricing rather than install Luxul for more margin? Thanks. Paul, I think we addressed a little bit of that, and you can get with your specific, all of us for the complete pricing, etc.
Yeah, there's some MSRPs, but yes, get with your local distributor there, wherever you happen to be located, and they can certainly get you the details on that.
Is this going to be distributed at box stores or Amazon?
No, it is not. It is, again, meant for custom installers, not
Of course.
mass market.
Did we talk about the warranty there?
It is standard Luxul warranty, 3 years, and lifetime support.
Bob Johnson, can you remote administer the product?
You can, as soon as the ProWatch firmware comes out. So as soon as that comes out, then yes, you not only be able to administer remote monitoring to the mesh, but because it'll be the full ProWatch Plus version, you'll be able to do all of the devices on your network or in your system, regardless of what brand they are. So really, really cool custom install feature there.
All right, continuing with the lightning. Paul asks, can 5G hertz, 5 gigahertz be turned off for many devices are 2.4 only and will not set up 5 is prominent. Sorry about the broken.
Let's see. If I understand what you're asking, Paul, yes, you could. I have to go back and check. I think in the app you do set up both, but then you could immediately jump right back into the user interface and turn off the 5 gig. Or turn off the 2.4, whichever is what you need. I can't remember on the app if you can. I know you can separate them. I don't know if you can. I don't think you can turn one radio off during the initial setup, but again, in the user interface, you go right in and say, I want to turn this radio off, and it'll be off. So real easy to do.
Got it. Does it support OpenVPN?
No, we actually, none of the Luxul products do. Our engineering team is actually very wary of OpenVPN because it's open source. It is subject, unfortunately, to many security holes, and so they've shied away from that for many years. So no, I don't have OpenVPN support.
How about a snap question, Jonathan? Is oversee a possibility in the future?
Not unless Snap wants to do it. We have actually been in talks with them as far as not just with mesh, but in general for Parasol. And unfortunately, they don't want to play ball. Unfortunately, they're very tied together, and so we are in talks with them, but I don't anticipate any sort of oversee coming onto the product at all. It'll be ProWatch, which also is free and full featured. ProWatch is much more like Domotes, much more like Oversee Pro. It's not just to this particular product. It's for everything on the network.
Again, we appreciate you talking as much as you can, about some of these issues. But, of course, love the questions. Tina's asking, can you show the comparison again? Tina, I'll get you the complete deck so we can go back through that comparison chart. I'm not sure if it was the ubiquity versus comparison chart you were looking for, but remember, guys, I'll send this whole deck to you guys in a few hours. Jose, does it matter what installer did the original install? Will all the apps be able to add more nodes to all projects?
The answer is no, it does not matter which install did it. And yes, any installer can come along with the app. Unlike the Eero one and unlike the Ubiquity software, it is not tied to that particular machine or device. So again, we don't hold anything in the cloud. So any of your installers could come along and add a node or do a system. Doesn't matter who does it. And anyone else could come along after the fact and make modifications to it. There's no tie there. No problem.
Good. Tom is asking about an application here. Would this be a usable guest house solution off a feed from the main house, separating the networks by using this as a router on guest house side?
Sure. I would imagine if you're talking about a router in the guest house and a router in the main house, that would be, you'd obviously have to have two different subnets, two different networks. But yes, you could do it that way, but you'd have two different networks in that case.
Got it. HB LaForge, can router administration be performed via standard web browser interface consistent with the ABR style GUI?
To a degree. Yes is the answer to your question. Let me just pull up, see if I can pull up. Well, I don't know if I can. I think I'm just sharing just that. But let me pull this screen back up here just to show you here. This is a screenshot of the web GUI. So yes, it's a little bit different, a little more modernized than what the standard, Luxul one is in regards to the look of it, but it's the same thing as a regular Luxul router, like I mentioned. So you have full options to do whatever it is you want to do.
Got it. Thank you. Joel's asking, can you explain your fast roaming technology?
Yeah, it's fast roaming is not ours. The active roaming is ours. And that one is a proprietary one that's been in our controller for years and years. Fast roaming is the same basic system that most other wireless companies are using, like Ubiquiti uses it, Arachnus uses it, Netgear uses it, Cisco uses it. And so it's something that's kind of built into the Wi-Fi spec. And really what it does is tries to speed up the transition from one AP or node to the next after the device kind of gets itself in trouble and says, hey, is there a better place for me to be? And if there is, and the device is looking for a better place, then fast roaming can speed up that transitional process. That's kind of what fast roaming does. That's a really, really quick, fast explanation of it too, by
Hey,
the way.
this is the lightning round. Lou,
Yeah.
where's the product made?
I'd have to double check, but I believe Taiwan.
Got it. Paul is giving us compliments. Thank you, Paul, for hanging in there with us. Got a couple more to go. Joaquin, what types of Wi-Fi speeds can be expected with gigabit feed?
Well, as with any Wi-Fi device, that is going to be largely determined by the environment, the distance, what the client device or the mobile device is capable of. So, I mean, you're going to see regular, Wi-Fi speeds out of this that you would normally see off of a 2x2 antenna type of device. So similar to a regular 810, similar to an Eero, similar to a lot of the Ubiquiti devices that are 2x2. And so, because it's 2x2, it's only going to go so quick. We've generally seen speeds to mobile devices, to phones specifically, depending again, largely depending upon the environment, in the 250, 300 to 350, maybe sometimes category, and everywhere in between. We've seen them down into the 100s. It just really depends upon the device, the environment. Again, all those things that go along with Wi-Fi.
John had a couple of questions, just where to go. Auto firmware updates, VPN support, band steering support. Is the technical support the best place for that?
Yeah, actually, the band steering, like I said, is either on or off, and it's fully automatic when it's on. There's nothing that you need to set up. Does support VPNs. What was the other part of the question?
Firmware updates.
Oh, firmware updates are automatic in the background. I'm not sure where that's going to end up. There is no firmware update currently, or everything that's shipping is on the current firmware. When the ProWatch one comes out, I suspect that, and I don't know this for sure, so don't quote me, but I suspect that it will be in the same manner as what our regular routers are, where you initiate it, say, yes, I want to do the firmware update now, and everything is automatic from the cloud from that point on. It goes and gets the update, pulls it down, installs it, but you do start the initial process of that. Again, don't quote me, could be wrong. It might be a little bit different, might be fully automatic on the mesh side, but I'd have to verify that with engineering.
A couple of setup questions that might be interesting. John, when setting up initial modem node through phone app, we are using Bluetooth or cellular. And to set up support dual NAT, oftentimes with brand X, we are in areas where cellular service, you can't hook up the router node to client's existing gateway.
Sure. Great question. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've experienced that on other products as well. The great thing here is you do not have to have an internet connection on your mobile device in order to set this up. The only thing that it checks is if there's an Ethernet internet connection to the node itself coming from the modem. So again, because we do not hold anything in the cloud, there is no cloud account for you to have, then you do not have to have a mobile connection on your device in order to set this up.
Got it. And along the same lines and setup, is there a Luxul app that can help map out how many APs or nodes would be required on an installation? If that's not a rule of thumb, do they have trouble penetrating metal or mirrors?
Well, again, we're talking about regular Wi-Fi stuff here. So any device, regardless of whether it's a regular AP or a mesh system, is going to have more trouble with mirrors and metal and water and all of the things that negatively affect radio signals trying to penetrate through something. And again, like I said, mesh is not averse to that. It's certainly same thing. We're talking about radio waves. Anything and everything that affects radio waves is going to affect it, regardless of whether it's coming from a mesh product or whether it's coming from a traditional AP product. So as far as the software question, there isn't anything built in that will tell you that, but there's lots of different free mapping or signal strength measuring products that are available on both iPhone and Android. Actually, iPhone only has one, it's Airport Utility, but the Android version has a number of them that really quick and easily and for free, you can determine what your signal strength is and kind of figure out where to place them. Certainly also we have a design service that allows that helps you out with this. So if you want us to take a look at your layout and get a second set of eyes on it or something like that, our design service is free. There's no charge for you as an integrator for that, and you can send us blueprints or you can send us a just a quick drawing layout, some information about it, and we'll help design the system for you and recommend places where to put the access points. And like I said, all of that's free.
Great, and thank you very much. And you great support. Lou also asked, what's your experience, or not really experience of with multiple Sonos products, as these guys are installing that or going into homes with existing multiple Sonos product. Is that something you guys kind of geared toward and kind of fact checked,
Yes. Again, same thing as Sonos on any network, regardless of whether it's mesh or not. Spanning tree does and can become a problem with any Sonos product. And so the easiest and most effective way to get around that is to put in a managed Luxul switch, because it has the spanning tree service already turned on that will then become the master of that and kind of calm down all the Sonos issues. So that's more of a switch function, not necessarily a router function or a Wi-Fi or AP or node function. So it's still best to take care of that inside of a switch, because the switch has the ability to control spanning tree inside that. I just appreciate your time and your effort of joining us today. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. Hopefully you've maybe learned something. But as he mentioned, if there's anything that we can do to help you out, we do have the desire to be your partner in all of this, whether it's mesh, whether it's APs, whether it's switches, routers, whatever the case is. Let us know. We're happy to help you out.